they do in overloaded rubber dinghies amidst huge shipping vessels in a busy maritime traffic. Just 2 days before the camp was destroyed, about 250 human rights advocates protested in Calais over a ban local authorities imposed that prohibited the distribution of food and water to the migrants. Roughly 3 weeks after the complete destruction of the Moria refugee camp in a fire on the Greek island of Lesbos, about 700 refugees were moved from the island to the mainland on Monday. The Greek broadcaster ERT noted that the refugees being moved had all filed their asylum requests. Over the next 2 weeks, another 2,300 people are expected to be moved to the mainland, having been granted refugee protection status. Authorities on Lesbos say they hope with the transfer of about 3,000 refugees, there will be relief at the Karatepe migrant camp, which has been described as worse than Moria. Karatepe was hastily erected after the fire at Moria, where over 12,000 people were living. Germany's right-wing Alternative for Germany party fired its parliamentary spokesman after he suggested that migrants be shot or gassed. The party had already suspended Christian Luth for describing himself as a fascist. But with a racist and xenophobic platform, the Alternative for Germany is still the largest opposition group in the German parliament. Last week, the European Union unveiled its new plan on how to manage migration. The new pact on migration and asylum would require that all 27 EU countries take part and has yet to be approved by EU leaders in the European Parliament. The proposed measures presented by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen on September 23rd would include a compulsory system of pre-screening for migrants arriving irregularly on EU territory. That would mean at the border, or if apprehended, within the territory. The screening includes a health and security checkup, fingerprinting, and registration in the Eurodac database. On the basis of this screening, the asylum seekers fall either into an accelerated procedure or a normal one. According to the EU, this process alone should take 5 days. For those migrants who come from countries with a low asylum acceptance rate, the proposed cut would be of less than 20%, the accelerated border procedure would be put into effect. That should last no more than 12 weeks. If their asylum claim is rejected, the European Commission says they will be sent back. To ensure that human rights are respected, the EC proposes monitoring mechanisms. For example, a new European Union agency for asylum. National systems, they say, are to be monitored by the EU and the new EU agency. These considerations are made so as to limit the number of illegal summary deportations at the border. The Dublin regulation, which requires the country of entry to process an asylum application, will remain in effect. However, its criteria are to be expanded. Asylum seekers who have close family members in another EU country or who have worked or studied there are to be taken to that country to undergo their asylum process. Also, if someone was issued a visa by a specific country, the asylum claim has to be processed there. This way, the EU wants to assure that more asylum seekers are distributed among the countries. It is also an attempt to close loopholes, encouraging people to attempt to abscond during the procedure. Another amendment to the current system is that recognized refugees would benefit from free movement after 3 years instead of after 5, as is currently the case. The new plan does not include binding asylum quotas, something that has been a sticking point for years, as single countries like Hungary or Poland have refused to take in asylum seekers. Instead, the European Union now proposes a system of shared, quote, solidarity and responsibility. According to this system, all all EU countries would be obliged to take on responsibility, meaning financial help, but not necessarily by taking in asylum seekers. Countries can also opt to pitch in by other means, either by sending border guards, police, or taking other operational measures, or paying for deportations. This system works in part on a voluntary basis and in part on a mandatory basis, depending on the level of urgency of the situation. The European Commission proposes a three-stream approach. In normal times, under the first pillar, taking in migrants from the other EU states is voluntary. According to the EC, normal times are outside of pressure situations. Willing member states will pledge capacities once a year and will enter a pre-committed pool. But when one country's asylum system is under extreme pressure, the second level, a mandatory solidarity mechanism, gets triggered. Other EU countries will have to pitch in, either by taking in asylum seekers or through other means, such as sending border guards or paying for those deportations. And finally, under the third stream, designed for crisis situations such as the so-called migration crisis of 2015, the European Commission could oblige member states to take on legal responsibility for deportations. This is what the EC calls return sponsorship. This means that individual member states that refuse to take in asylum seekers will not be obliged to do so, even in crisis situations. One of the central aims of the new migration pact is to expedite deportations of refused asylum seekers. Deportations would no longer be done by single member states individually, but rather in coordination. A member state that refuses to take in eligible asylum seekers, country A, can instead become involved in deportations. This means that member state A, for a specific time period, would be responsible for deporting a specific number of people who are present in another EU country, country B. This could also mean that country A might have to take in the refused asylum seekers if deportations could not be implemented in time. The European Commission also wants to deepen cooperation with non-EU countries in order to strengthen countries of origin and, in effect, stem migration to the European Union. The proposed measures include ramping up support for refugee hosting countries, fighting migrant smuggling, or developing orderly channels for legal migration. It also wants to create further incentives, such as jobs close to home, especially for youth. The EC wants to step up cooperation by third countries in taking back refused asylum seekers, since deportations often get held up by non-EU countries that refuse to take back migrants who have passed through their territories on their way to the EU. Currently, the EU has readmissions agreements with only 24 countries. Just to the end of today's program. For Orlando Lumbreras at the sound controls and myself, Alison Hughes, thanks for tuning in. Hasta pronto. We'll play out with Rafael Riquene on guitar from his new album, Herencia.
Exterior de España. L'émission en français.